Namita, you have to go on mute. Thank you. Yeah, Namita, you have to go on mute. In infinite ways, the Sadguru tries to draw the aspirant into his own being so that yeah,
Sambhav will have to mute the mic, otherwise we'll not be able to hear.
yes, thank you. Internal eye. In infinite ways, the Sadguru tries to draw the aspirant into his own being so that the aspirant may get disentangled from the mazes of the universe and come to desire God. This longing for God is present in the aspirant from the very beginning, but the master makes this primary longing more intense and articulate by opening the internal eye of the aspirant. When the internal eye is opened, God, who is the object of search and longing, is actually sighted. As the gaze of the soul is turned inward and fixed upon the supreme reality, the desire to establish union with it becomes much more ardent than when the soul is groping for God through mere speculation or imagination. When the time is ripe, the master can open this internal eye in an instant. Om point. Ultimately, the aspirant has to realize that God is the only reality, that and that he is really one with God. This implies that he should not be overpowered by the spectacle of the multiform universe. In fact, the whole universe is in the self and springs into existence from the tiny point in the self, referred to as the Om point. But the self, as the individualized soul, has become habituated to gathering experiences through one medium or another, and therefore it comes to experience the universe as a formidable rival other than itself. Those who have realized God constantly see the universe as springing from this Om point, which is in everyone. The process of perception runs parallel to the process of creation, and the reversing of the process of perception without obliterating consciousness amounts to realizing the nothingness of the universe as a separate entity. The self, as the individualized soul, sees first through the mind, then through the subtle eye, and lastly through the physical eye. But it is vaster than all it can perceive. The big oceans and the vast spaces of the sky are tiny as compared with the self. In fact, all that it can perceive is finite, but the self itself is finite. When the individualized self retains full consciousness and yet sees nothing, it has crossed the universe of its own creation and has taken the first step to know itself as everything. This section is called reversing the process of perception. This is an important point, I think.
We can highlight the last sentence. So can you please read it again?
Sure.
Last sentence. It's got a lot of impact.
Yes. When the individualized self retains full consciousness and yet sees nothing, it has crossed the universe of its own creation and has taken the first step to know itself as everything. I think he starts with the concept of perception and then says that the real perception is when you are able to do this. It's a very powerful line. I agree. I'll just
If you go to the previous paragraph, it almost summarizes the process of say meditation. Can read from ultimately the aspirant has to realize that God is the only reality and that he is really one with God. This implies that he should not be overpowered by the spectacle of multiform universe. In fact, the whole universe is in the self and springs into existence from the tiny point in the self referred to as Om point. But the self, as the individualized soul, has become habituated to gathering experiences through one media or the other, and therefore it comes to experience the universe as a formidable rival other than itself. Those who have realized God constantly see the universe as springing from this Om point, which is in everyone. This process of perception runs parallel to the process of creation, and the reversing of the process of perception without obliterating consciousness amounts to realizing the nothingness of the universe as a separate entity. So this is the process of meditation where you are trying to get out of this gross consciousness, retain the consciousness, and look inside
Yeah,
to the home point.
it's a good insight. This
Yeah.
is what meditation is all about. Yes. Siddhis. The entire process. Anything else from anybody? If we can. Okay, so I take that as a no, and I continue. Siddhis.
I
The entire.
I
Yeah.
have to say, I think it goes beyond the point of meditation. It is like meditation melts into this reality. I don't
Yes,
know.
yes. I think it's more profound than meditation. Your point is well
Yeah,
received, right? So you're trying
yeah.
to say that
It's not,
the focus
yeah,
can be the home point, but finally the goal of these two paragraphs is to recognize and acknowledge this larger reality and not
yeah.
get lost in the perception of the multiform universe.
Yeah, the meditation is say meditation is a technique if you are going to get into something, but the
Correct.
real experience, when the real in the real experience, the meditation melts, so it goes beyond meditation.
Agreed. I
So
think
in effect, what you're saying is that meditation is just a tool, not the goal.
Yes, yes, yes.
Is that what it comes to?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. In the reality, when you become infinite self, there is no meditation. That is the reality.
correct. Agreed.
That's it. That's the end of it. There's no meditation. You don't feel meditator, meditation, and God separate. Everything merges into one.
Effort to effortlessness. That is the.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay. The next section is Siddhis. The entire process of withdrawing consciousness from the universe and becoming conscious of the self is accompanied by an increasing control of all the vehicles of consciousness. Such control is made possible by the vivification and activation of unused centers of control and the functioning of new centers brings in its train a number of hidden powers. These new powers are commonly known as siddhis, and they can come before the aspirant has become spiritually perfect. In fact, egotism can flourish through the acquisition of such powers. The aspirant may not only take delight in possessing them, but might actually use them for mundane purposes from which he has not necessarily freed himself. Furtherance of no. Siddhis are therefore rightly regarded as obstacles to the attainment of realization. However, after God is realized, all these powers dwindle in their importance. The Siddhis have their scope in the nothingness, that is the universe, whereas the person who realizes God is permanently and immovably established in the supreme reality. Although the whole universe is like a zero to the God realized person, he may voluntarily assume responsibility for those souls who are enmeshed in the tangles of the universe. In that case, he can freely and legitimately make use of these powers for the spiritual good of others. Furtherance of divine plan. There is nothing that does not admit of direct or indirect control by the masters of wisdom. Large social phenomena such as wars, revolution, and epidemics, as well as cosmic phenomena such as earthquakes and floods, are equally amenable to their control and direction through the release of the forces of the exalted planes on which the masters are consciously stationed. The masters may also use occult forces to effect cooperative and coordinated spiritual work. They frequently hold meetings and conferences on the higher inner planes for securing the advancement of humanity. The oversoul is all, the oversoul in all is only one, and it always functions as a unity. Those who have become conscious of this unity become fit to understand unlimited responsibility because they have shed the limitations of the human mind and have become so impersonal and universal in their interest. They are effective vehicles for the execution and furtherance of the divine plan on earth. So the cross mark here just denotes the fact that the numbering is messed up. So we are on 191 and the soft copy says it is 198, but actually the physical copy is 192 and we have verified that the text is not amiss. So don't panic. So I can take a pause here if there is anything to be discussed on the last couple of paragraphs.
I wanted to know the meaning of vivification. I've never heard
Yeah,
that
I
word.
don't know too. Namita has the Webster's. If she has it handy, she can tell us what it is. If she has it, otherwise it's fine. By the way, C.D. Deshmukh, I think, has given us many words. So I remember 2-3 words that didn't make any sense. They were few. First time I'm coming across those words. So it's a good point. I think maybe we can just look it up.
Hi, vivification is an operation on a description, logic, knowledge base to improve performance of a semantic reasoner. I don't know what it means.
I think you should repeat that again.
Vivification is an operation on a description, logic, knowledge base to improve performance of a semantic reasoner. I think we need another dictionary to understand this.
Yeah, thank you.
I agree. I agree. Thank you. Thank you anyway. So I think let's just see.
Go to the sentence where it was. Read that sentence again. Yeah, that's probably we can make out. Yeah.
Where was it? Verification.
Somewhere in the beginning of the paragraph.
Yeah. No. Okay, so let me search it.
There's a simpler meaning as well. The goal of this operation is to improve the performance of the reasoner by replacing a complex set of concepts with a single concept, which subsumes the original concepts.
Okay, I found the line. So that's simpler. You're right.
Yeah.
So such control is made possible by the vivification and activation of unused centers of control, and the functioning of new centers brings in its train a number of hidden powers. So maybe the second meaning is what is used here, the simplification and replacement by simpler things. So maybe that's what it means here. This is the line, by the way. Such control is made possible by the vivification and activation of unused centers of control, and the functioning of new centers brings in its train a number of hidden powers. Thank you, Namita.
I think to me it is looking like as if vivification here is meaning kind of exploration or expansion and then activation of those powers. I mean, they are in the sleep state, and then you explore latent state, and then you explore them and vivify them or make them vivid, as we say. Explicit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
That makes sense. Vividity.
That's a
vividity.
It goes against the concept in the dictionary that is making it simplified.
By the way,
vivid.
Vivify also stands for animate, invigorate, quicken, refresh, revive.
Yes.
Jai Baba.
Yeah. Jai Baba. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, Jai Baba.
I think we should do this where we see new words. At least we learn the word. Jai Baba. Thank you. So if that's okay, then we'll continue. I'm going on to page 193, Place of Occultism in Spiritual Life, the part 3, Occultism and Spirituality. Occultism as a science. Occultism is a branch of knowledge concerned with the study of certain aspects and forces of the universe and the human personality. In this respect, there is no difference in principle between occultism and other sciences concerned with the study of these subjects. The difference between occultism and other sciences arises because other sciences are concerned with the aspects and forces directly or indirectly accessible to ordinary observation and manipulation, whereas occultism is concerned with those hidden aspects and forces that are essentially inaccessible to ordinary observation and manipulation. The development of occult knowledge is conditioned by the unfoldment of the latent powers of the human spirit. Many of the psychic research societies of modern times approach occult knowledge with the same attitude that characterizes the study of other fields of knowledge. In principle, there seems to be no reason why it should be regarded as either less valuable or more valuable than other fields of theoretical knowledge. One finds these societies trying to pursue occult knowledge in an organized and cooperative manner. The perfect masters have deemed it desirable at times to reveal to the generality of mankind some theoretical knowledge about certain important features of spiritual life, such as immortality and reincarnation, the existence of different bodies and planes, and the laws concerning evolution and the operation of karma. Such knowledge gives the right sort of background for spiritual aspiration and effort and brings the perspective of the average person as near to the truth as is possible under the circumstances. However, with the exception of such general knowledge about fundamentals, the masters have consistently preferred to attach minimum importance to the spread of detailed knowledge about occult phenomena. They have even scrupulously withheld information concerning those points likely to have vital bearing upon occultism as an art. This section was called theoretical knowledge. Those who know and those who do not know. In occultism, more than in any other science, there is a sharp and significant division between those who know and those who do not know. In other sciences, to a certain extent, indirect knowledge can take the place of direct knowledge. In occultism, indirect knowledge can in no way approximate direct knowledge in import and significance. Therefore, though occultism is an important science, the spread of purely theoretical information about the occult can have little importance. For those who have no first-hand experience of the occult, purely theoretical acquaintance with some occult facts can have no special value. These occult phenomena are bound to remain for them more or less in the same category as descriptions of unseen lands or works of imagination. Occultism as an art.
Yes.
However, even the spread of purely theoretical information about occult facts is accompanied at times with mischief, since it is likely to arouse idle curiosity and stimulate craving for acquiring control over unknown forces with a view to using them for selfish ends. There is nothing particularly spiritual about occult power as such. Like any other mundane power or scientific invention, it is capable of being used for good ends or bad. It gives immense scope for cooperative work on the higher planes. But this necessarily implies a spiritual preparedness to shoulder the special responsibility. Occultism as a science may be said to be more or less on the same footing as other sciences, but occultism as an art stands by itself. The novice may seek some occult powers and within certain limits even succeed in acquiring them. But this new attainment will prove to be a curse rather than a blessing if he is not spiritually prepared for the fulfillment of the new responsibility implied in the acquisition of the new powers. The section is called Misuse of Occult Powers. Even the slightest misuse of occult power causes a severe reaction and creates a binding for the soul. Sometimes it may retard the progress of the aspirant and may even lead to a considerable setback. Apart from the spiritual ruin, the novice may invite upon himself through indiscreet use of occult power. Apart from the spiritual ruin, the novice may invite upon himself through indiscreet use of occult power. He is bound to be a source of incalculable harm to others over whom he has succeeded in wielding a formidable advantage. Occult power must further spiritual purposes. In the hands of the masters of spiritual wisdom, occult power is not only safe, but has immense capacities that can be harnessed in the service of humanity. Yet, even they are very sparing and economical in its use. By its very nature, occultism as an art has its own natural limitations. It cannot be widely used for helping the of humanity or helping it in its mundane purpose. The introduction of an uncertain and incalculable factor, which the free exercise of occult power would involve, is bound to create much confusion and disturbance in the ordinary pursuits of man, who must be left to his own limitations, resources, and possibilities for the equal and uninterrupted working out of the law of karma. The use of occult power, therefore, has to be strictly restricted to the furtherance of spiritual purposes. Material bait for spiritual purposes. Sometimes the masters do fulfill some of the mundane desires of their devotees. However, this is not done because they are interested in mundane affairs, but because they are interested in weaning their devotees away from their material cravings. When children are very young, they often cannot be induced to learn the alphabet. In order to attract their attention to the alphabet, their elders sometimes present them with letters specially constructed out of sweets. Then they attend to these lessons, not because they are interested in the letters as such, but because they are interested in the sweets. Yet this often proves to be the beginning of their interest in the letters themselves, and the sweets can soon be discarded after they have cultivated this interest. Worldly people are like such young children. Just as a parent may occasionally give a piece of chocolate to the baby in order to encourage it to be good, the masters might give their worldly minded devotees certain harmless objects they desire so that they may eventually be willing to part with them and become interested in true spirituality. I think all of us might have had some sweets in our life, I'm sure.
Yeah, there is a talk by Pratap Ahir.
Yes, today.
It was recorded in Mumbai. Yeah, that's today, but old one. Where he talks of even
Sanjay.
There? Hello?
We lost you after you said Pratap Ahir.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, it's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. You want to repeat what you said?
Yeah, you're able to hear me, right?
Yes, now we
so
can.
there he says that Baba sometimes fulfills your needs or your requests, but he just does it just to, आपको अपने जाल में फांसने के लिए सिर्फ उतना सर्व करते हैं. So fact, that's how it is actually.
correct.
Just to make you his.
Said this to
he
so
gives you
people.
this.
Many times Baba throws chocolates at you, colloquially we say, right?
Yeah.
So I was very amused with the usage of the word.
Yeah.
Sort of a carrot.
Yeah.
Carrot.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Samira or Namita or somebody said something in the middle. We cut them off. Okay, no problem. I'll continue. Masters not to be approached with material motives. Worldly people are so immersed in material cravings that nothing interests them unless it has some direct bearing upon the fulfillment of these cravings. Thus, they may come to a perfect master and serve or respect him in the expectation of being helped with their material problems. When a person approaches a master with respect, it becomes the duty of the master to help him spiritually, even when he has come with some other motive. The master, with his perfect understanding of the human mind, may therefore decide to help the person materially in order to win him over to true spirituality. Such offering of material bait for spiritual purposes is an exception rather than the rule. Mostly, the masters discourage people from approaching them for any material advantage. From the spiritual point of view, it is infinitely better for a person to love a master simply because he is lovable than to love him for some selfish ends. People should go to a master because they are genuinely interested in true spirituality and for no other reason. It is only then that they derive the greatest benefit from their contact with the master. Purification of human heart. That's the next section. Occultism as an art derives its justification solely from its capacity to subserve spiritual purposes. Any diversion of occult power from this end may be looked upon as misuse. It must not be summoned merely for worldly purposes. Its true function is not to secure the fulfillment of human cravings, but to secure the purification of the human heart. Occultism as an art is among the most effective and potent factors that can contribute to the purging of humanity by helping it to give up baser desires. Occultism as an art becomes particularly relevant and necessary for those who are about to unfold their latent psychic powers, for those who already have considerably developed powers but sometimes are not fully alive to the gross world owing to the withdrawal of their consciousness to the higher planes. The section is called Use of Powers on Higher Planes. Hence, they have to be spoken to in a language they can understand. Many advanced aspirants develop a number of occult and mystic powers, but they are often as much in need of spiritual help as the ordinary run of humanity. As they are in possession of many powers, they can be readily and effectively helped by a perfect master, irrespective of distance. When the master's help can be consciously received in the higher planes, it becomes much more fruitful than the help he can give merely through the gross medium. Coming down. Apart from the difficulties existing in forward movement on the path, one of the characteristics of advanced aspirants is to get so deeply established in the happiness of their station that they are reluctant to come down for work in the gross sphere. This coming down of advanced aspirants must not be confused with the return to normal consciousness after the seventh plane experience, which is the state of God realization of the perfect ones. A perfect master's return journey, as well as the consequent position in the different planes after realization, is actuated by altruistic motives and is the result of prarabdha, inevitable destiny, which he utilizes for the spiritual uplift of humanity in accordance with his vested authority. Although perfect masters are conscious of all the planes simultaneously, it is said that Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti of Ajmer, India, for instance, stationed himself in the fifth plane of involution of consciousness. It is also true that the avatar functions from all the planes of consciousness simultaneously, but sometimes, for his universal work, stations himself in a particular plane. Therefore, it is said, for example, that the Prophet Muhammad stationed himself in the seventh plane, while Lord Buddha stationed himself in the fifth. The coming down of advanced aspirants, on the other hand, is induced in order to help accelerate their forward movement on the spiritual path when they find themselves hung up anywhere between the planes. Thus, if an aspirant gets hung up somewhere between the third and fourth planes, a master usually brings him down to the third plane prior to pushing him up to the fourth. Coming down from a high station is also often necessary in the interest of those who are still in the wilderness of the world and have not yet entered the path. The master may sometimes decide to get some spiritual work done through an advanced aspirant and may require him to postpone his efforts for individual advancement for the sake of others. Such coming down eventually turns out to be a spiritual preparation for traversing the next stage of the path smoothly and quickly. But even so, the aspirant finds it difficult to renounce the advantages of his attainment for the purpose of helping others. Coming down is particularly difficult for a person intensely experiencing a state of enchantment. In Sufism, this enchantment is known as Hayrat. The aspirant finds it extremely difficult to get out of this state. However, it is necessary that he should resist getting lost in enchantment because sometimes he must come down for the sake of others in the world. A master has ways of dealing with an advanced aspirant and can bring him around to any unpalatable move. Story of Ganj-e-Shakkar. This is very well illustrated by the story of a famous wali named Baba Fariduddin, also known as Ganj-e-Shakkar. Much before he attained illumination, this wali, or friend of God, was in Hayrat and completely absorbed in that state. He could not close his eyes, which were always open, dazed and glassy, and he could not eat. His master, Khwaja Muinuddin Chishti, wanted him to get out of this state of enchantment and to come down, but the wali found it difficult to obey his master. Then the master turned the key and brought him around in the following manner. The master inwardly inspired 5 thieves to come near the place of Ganj-e-Shakkar. They sat within 5 paces of the wali and began to divide the plunder they had stolen. Soon they began quarreling with each other, and 2 of them killed the other 3. These 2, who were successful in the quarrel, divided the loot between them and ran away. But while running away, they passed by the place where the wali was sitting. As soon as they came near him, he regained normal consciousness. The proximity of the criminals was sufficient crude stimulus to bring him down to normal consciousness. The first thing that the wali saw were some sparrows, and his first impulse was to try his nascent powers on them. He said, "O sparrows, die." And the sparrows fell down dead. Then he said, "Sparrows, rise up." And they rose. The 2 thieves who saw this were amazed, and they requested the wali to raise the 3 thieves whom they had killed in a moment of anger. On this, the wali addressed himself to the 3 dead thieves and said, "Rise up." But they did not rise. He was aghast at the thought that he had lost his powers, and repenting for the frivolous use of his powers, he went crying to his master. When he came near, he saw that those 3 thieves were massaging the feet of his master. The wali then went back to his original place, indifferent to food or drink. He became lean and remained in the same spot for 10 years until white ants began to eat his body. People used to come to the wali and place near him large quantities of sugar, which the ants ate instead. Since he was always surrounded by heaps of sugar, he came to be known as Ganj-e-Shakkar, or the treasury of sugar. His story shows how even most advanced aspirants need the help of a master if they are to proceed further on the way to realization. Occult phenomena have no intrinsic value. Ganjay Shakkar's story illustrates the sort of occasion that calls forth the use of occult methods and occult powers. But it must be carefully noted that no occult phenomenon, regardless of magnitude, can have any intrinsic value in itself. The value that seems to belong to any phenomena, occult or non-occult, is either purely illusory or entirely relative. Illusory values arise when anything acquires false importance because it stimulates or promises to fulfill the passing cravings and the limited purposes born of ignorance. If the thing is taken out of the context of these passing cravings and limited purposes, it is immediately deprived of the entire meaning with which it seemed to be surcharged. Relative values arise when a thing acquires importance through serving the realization or expression of the truth. The importance of such things is derived from their being the essential conditions for the game of divine life. And therefore, though it is relative, such value is real and not illusory. Occultism distinct from spirituality. Most persons, consciously or unconsciously, attach undue importance to occult phenomena and mistake them for spirituality. For them, miracles and the phenomena of the spirit world are the real topics of absorbing interest, and this is presumed to indicate an interest in a life of true spirituality. There is a very clear and definite distinction, however, between occultism and mysticism, spiritualism and spirituality, and any failure to grasp the full import of this difference can only lead to confusion. All miracles belong to the phenomenal world, which is the world of shadows. As phenomena, they are subject to change, and nothing that changes can have lasting value. Realization of the eternal truth is an initiation into the unchangeable being, which is the supreme reality, and no acquaintance with the occult world or capacity to manipulate its forces can really amount to realization of the truth. Occult phenomena. One second. Only realization of divine life matters. Occult phenomena are much within the domain of false imagination, as are ordinary phenomena of the gross world. From the spiritual point of view, the only important thing is to realize divine life and to help others realize it by manifesting it in everyday happenings. To penetrate into the essence of all being and significance and to release the fragrance of that inner attainment for the guidance and benefit of others by expressing in the world of forms truth, love, purity, and beauty. This is the sole game that has intrinsic and absolute worth. All other happenings, incidents, and attainments in themselves can have no lasting importance. I have a question.
You can highlight this.
Yes, I was saying.
Yeah.
Highlight.
To penetrate onwards.
To penetrate, exactly.
From here on. Yeah. Sorry for interruption. Yeah.
Actually, okay. I had the doubt. I didn't understand the difference between those four words that he started describing. So I want to read that again. If anybody got it, you can explain. Basically, the mystical and spirituality. Right? All miracles.
There are very clear.
There is a very clear and definite distinction, however, between occultism, mysticism, spiritualism, and spirituality. So he's not explaining that, right? It's the distinction between spirituality and occultism is clear, but I don't know what is mysticism, or is he grouping occultism and mysticism on one side, spiritualism and spirituality on the other?
I'll tell. Basically, when he's using the word ism, when he's using the word ism, that means it is a kind of man-made movement, or trying to imagine things and in the right pursuit, but it's ism. Actually, it's not reality. So That's why spiritualism and spirituality he has used actually. Spiritualism is that we have to make the distinction properly. Yeah.
I think he's just grouping them together because he uses and in the middle and a comma. So
Yes. All three isms are grouped together and separated from spirituality.
No, I would go with what Samira is saying probably, which is occultism and mysticism on one side, because there is an and between them, a comma, and then spiritualism and spirituality. Probably.
Then what is spiritualism?
No idea.
No idea. Yes.
Kama said something. Started.
No, I think what Sanjay said was correct. Anything to do with ism, ISM, has no meaning. It is just another point of view. It is, there are all kinds of Hinduism, Zoroastrian, all kinds of isms are kind of philosophies. And in the last paragraph you read, from the spiritual point of view, the only important thing is to realize divine life, right? And spirituality is basically the soul game, because from the spiritual point of view. So I think that according to my understanding, occultism is based on, getting siddhis and, using those powers. So you can misuse the powers for material life, or you can use those powers to go ahead in your spiritual path. And spiritualism and so mysticism is something that we have mystical experiences. All of us have had different kinds of mystical experiences in reference to Baba. So that is one aspect. And so spiritualism is also like sometime, misunderstanding the aspects of spirituality. When you're on the path, we can get, distracted by certain things. Even though here it is said very clearly, occult powers are actually given for helping humanity in their spiritual path, not for their material life. Because there are only two kinds of life we are dealing with on a daily basis. One is our practical material life, and which is what we call as the outer aspect, and the inner aspect is our spiritual life. But the only goal is God realization, as far as our life is concerned. So these are just tools, Even spiritualism is like a kind of a tool, you can say, like I said, the operating system. All isms are, Buddhism, Hinduism, whether it's Islam, Christianity, all are just operating system, a kind of a spiritualism, in a way. But the real goal is God realization. Hey, Baba.
Okay, Baba. Audio is weak, Vidya. Is that Vidya? I heard somebody say.
Yeah, I can probably add a little bit. I think it says there is a clear and definite distinction, however, between occultism and mysticism, spiritualism and spirituality, and any failure to grasp the full import of this difference can only lead to confusion. Now, this is what it says is what is occultism and mysticism. These are two different systems, right? We have to take them both as they are, and not to say the one is lower than other or things like that. And here, but there is a difference between spiritualism and spirituality. The spiritualism is about more people being spiritual and things like that. It is like a ism that you are trying to say that, okay, everyone should be spiritually this thing and all. But spirituality means the very act of it is the spirituality. So each one of them have their importance, and none of them are lower than the other. But it only says everything should be collated and understood together to remove the confusion if there is any, and one should not be held higher than the other. So it has to be understood as a full concept. That's what I understand from this.
Yeah, it's a road and a destination. So through spiritualism, probably you get into, once you transcend spiritualism, you get into real spirituality. So some road
Yeah.
everybody needs, some path is needed. So maybe in that sense
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Want to add, that occultism or mysticism are just some tools. As we had just discussed, that ultimate goal, God realization. So maybe we have this tools, and I think in God Speaks, Baba has said that he goes beyond all Hinduism or any other isms, and only one God, and only one. There's only one family, one religion. There's no too many religions.
Yeah, I think
Is that
your audio didn't come through fine.
Oh, okay. I'll
Yeah,
repeat.
so, but
I'm saying that
yeah, please.
occultism and mysticism are just tools to reach the path of God realization. Is now so yes. And
Okay.
sorry, there's some disturbance in the network. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so that's fine. So we are almost at the end of, we're at the end of a chapter and we are almost out of time. And I thought we can stop here for the day from a reading perspective, unless there are any more questions on occultism or discussion points. Okay. So
One more thing to add, which is in one of the earlier paragraphs. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, it's better now. Go ahead.
There's one more part. In one of the paragraphs, it's mentioned that even when you are not in physical presence, you can be mentally.
He's dropping off.
Yeah, he's dropping off.
Sorry, I'm dropping off. We'll keep it for later. I'm dropping off again and again. I don't know what's the problem. Sorry.
Hello?
No problem. No problem. Jai Baba. Okay.
I had a question, if I can ask. Sorry.
Sure.
And the question is for Vidya, because Vidya gave a very profound explanation of her experiences yesterday. So I had lingering thoughts. I would request Vidya to explain. We heard the journey, her vision of what she experienced during the accident, and then she's here now. What is the importance of all this, and how should we, as disciples of Baba or your co-disciples, how should we benefit from this, from Vidya's view?
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Thanks for asking this question, Sunil. And I think even I asked this question to Baba, saying, what is the use of this memory? Some disturbance on the other side. Okay. So I asked Baba the same question. What is the use of this memory now? Even if it is so, what is the purpose of giving me this memory? Sometimes I may not be able to answer from others' point of view, but I will answer what Baba told me about this. And so Baba told me that when it becomes important for the aspirant to know that, the connection that Baba and I have has actually strengthened my spiritual journey. So the moment I got to know that my connection with Baba was there from the past life, my connection became stronger with Baba, and I had an immovable faith in the whole thing. and that really has that increased maybe that speed of my progress increased, and then I was better off, and I don't know what. But I think Baba has got a divine plan for everyone. So maybe my divine plan, my plan for Baba had this plan for me, and that's helped me faster to grow in the. So that's for me. And for others, I feel what I heard from other people, I would tell what I heard from other people when I went and spoke to the groups and individuals. And Kama is also here. Probably Kama can explain his point of view, because we had very close interaction on this topic and discussed many times. So what I heard from other people is one, that all this is a proof of Baba's way of working. And it is a proof that Baba, means some people were wondering where is Baba. They go to Meherabad, they stay there for a long time, and they don't see Baba anywhere. And they were somewhere not experiencing anything of Baba. But when they hear some stories like this, probably their conviction is stronger that, yeah, Baba is working in different ways. So they felt very good, and some people even felt better staying around and talking about my story. So if any benefit for the spiritual, any spiritual benefit to the other people, then it is good. But there was also criticism about the whole thing. And then, yeah, so I think that the criticism is better for the other people. So I also think that will also lead to spiritual progress for the other people. So I think my story helps in getting some progress. That is why I'm here. I don't know, and maybe
Thank
Kama
you.
can add more.
Thank you, Vidya. Spot on. Exactly what I thought. Thank you so much.
Jai Baba, I have a question as well for Vidya.
Yeah.
I may not have heard you completely, but you may have addressed it, but I could have missed it. I'm thinking, if you were so close to Baba, shouldn't you not be in body anymore? Shouldn't you have attained sixth, seventh plane or something like that? Why was it necessary for you to come back?
So the one one answer is, like, if someone is in body, it doesn't mean that they are not, they have not grown, including all of us. I would say that all the people who are in the bodies, there are many good people still in the bodies, and they work as per the divine plane. As far as Baba's Mandali is concerned, Baba's work is more important than one person's enlightenment or one person dropping the body. And in Baba's story, Baba has said that Neelu has reached me. So some people even asked me, Baba said you reached him. So why are you here again? So I am saying, what is the meaning of someone when you say someone dropped the body and reached Baba? Can someone define that? I mean, I think there is a lot more meaning in what we say, that when we reach Baba. So if someone is not in body, it doesn't mean they're not with Baba. And if I'm in body, I don't want to measure myself that I'm in sixth plane, seventh plane, or not on any plane. So I don't look, all these things are important for me. And and one more thing is, I think it is a matter of faith, and it is a matter of each one's perspective. So I think that works as per one's own progress, and I don't have to interfere on that.
Vidyaji, I have a question for you. Can you hear me? So
Yeah.
Can we interpret it this way, that it's the soul in the body and not vice versa, you know?
So I think that we have been reading discourses and God speaks and all. Yeah. So the body is just an instrument, right? The body is not so important part of the game. So the body is just there, but the soul is the important part. And merging with Paratpar Parabrahma is the goal, which is Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or it may be Mukti, or could be any kind of thing. So if you're talking about soul and body and all these things, I think in Baba's game, these things are just a matter of, they're very matter of trivial, this thing. If someone has to be there, as I said, that obedience is to master, to say, okay, even if I am on any plane, if Baba says go back, I would go back. I don't care about my own progress and all. This is all on human mind, that seventh plane is the biggest plane and one should once you reach seventh plane, you never come back. How did Avatar come back, or anyone come back for that matter? If it is good for the humanity, one should come back. And maybe one of the reasons why he brought me back is probably some good that will happen to me as well as others.
Vidya, can I come in here?
Yeah.
I have 2 points here. One is either Baba has some purpose in keeping you in this life. The other one is your sansaric vestiges are still there for you to expend and then dilute them. That may be the other aspect by which you are taken a birth. These are the possible two things, I feel.
Possible. I mean, I would say possible. I agree.
Yes. Any other comment from anyone?
Yeah, I completely agreed with Vidya. I was convinced with her explanation, but reading the text, again, there are many terminologies which I wanted to clarify. So her experience of, last life and so on is occultism, mysticism, or spiritualism?
So I also faced this question before. Now this if somewhere in discourses, I don't know whether we have finished or not, just because we are on discourses, Baba said that what Baba told me, but let me tell you from the book, because people get more convinced and everyone understands discourses better. So in discourses itself, Baba has said that if someone needs that and it helps the person, or if it is required for the whole thing, I would give past life memory to the people. And Baba, the whole game, the whole Baba's explanation is there are past lives, right? He's saying that there are reincarnations and we come back so many times. So one, I don't want to dissect so much into the problem, so much into it that I lose my experience only to convince other people. But at the same time, Baba said that if it is required, I'll give the past life memory.
Back to you.
So yeah, so he said it somewhere, I don't know where he said, I don't remember the page number and all, but he said it in discourses that if required, I'll give the past life memories.
In any way, it's for progression of your spiritual journey and maybe some benefit to others, like you said.
Yeah, maybe. I really don't know about. Yeah,
no, it's very important for us to learn from others. Yeah, thank you very much. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Karthik, you can go ahead.
This is Kama. I just want to add one more thing, which Vidya had pointed out and all of you have been discussing, that past life experiences happen when we are ready for it. Because technically speaking, even leading this current life with our experiences, past experiences in this life from childhood to adulthood itself is very complicated. The mind will not be able to handle if we are able to look at all our past lives, what kind of incarnations, how do we reincarnated in a male or female form, and what kind of experiences we had. So I think the divine game is designed in such a way, it happens when at the right time, when we are capable of able to handle that and then use that for our spiritual journey. This is what I've read about.
Yes.
I think what Baba said is very important, yes, because if you are not able to use this whole thing for spiritual progress, one would mess up the life. Even the childhood memories sometimes come in our way of our progress, normal progress. So spirituality is very far away. So unless these memories help in the spiritual progress, they're of no use actually.
Yes. Yes. Karthik has muted his audio. Karthik, are you?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
I
yes.
was on mute. Sorry.
Yes.
I was talking continuously and thought nobody's listening to me. Thank you. So I'll stop recording and shift to the next section with the fresh start of the file.